Hello, and a warm welcome from Oxford to all of our viewers from across the world for the second edition of our Business, the Next 25 Years series to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Saïd Business School here at the University of Oxford. My name is Dr. Chris Moos. I'm a lecturer in Organizational Studies here at Saïd Business School, and it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to host today's conversation between Professor Maitlis and John Flint about the Crucibles of leadership learning. We've chosen leadership learning as a topic because the importance of learning for leaders, and specifically CEOs, is one of the recurrent themes that has come out of the extensive leadership research that we're undertaking at Saïd. Now, before we dive into the conversation, please allow me to introduce our protagonists who have kindly agreed to come speak to us today. Saïd Maitlis is a professor of organizational behavior and leadership at the Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. Her research examines how people make sense of important, challenging, and sometimes painful issues at work, and highlights the emotional side of organizational life for individuals, work groups, and top management teams. Sally is the academic director of the Oxford High Performance Leadership Program at Oxford Saïd, and contributes to a variety of other executive programs, as well as working as a leadership coach and psychotherapist. She has degrees in psychology, organizational behavior, and counseling psychology, and this combination of disciplines underpins her research, teaching, coaching, and therapeutic work. John Flint is the inaugural Chief Executive of the UK Infrastructure Bank, having been appointed to the post by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in September 2021. John is also the former Group Chief Executive of HSBC, a company he joined as a graduate trainee and progressed through the ranks to become Chief Executive over a 30-year career. John is a passionate advocate for the responsibility of leaders to create an environment for the people they lead to be at their best, and enjoys sharing his leadership learnings with those embarking upon their own leadership journeys. John spent most of his career working overseas and now lives with his family in London and Yorkshire. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Saïd Maitlis and John Flint. And with that, I will hand it to Sally to kick off the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very, very much, John, for being willing to come and share your experiences and your insights with us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Sally.
Oh, you're welcome. Our conversation is called Crucibles of Leadership Learning, and it's drawing on some of the work by the American scholar and practitioner Warren Bennis, who wrote about how important difficult experiences can be, ones that really stretch us, test us, and sort of prompt a kind of sense-making process about the situation we're in and actually also about ourselves. And what he and many others have found is this kind of experience can be the most powerful opportunity for learning, for growth, and for growing as a leader. So rather than ask you to tell us a heroic story about your illustrious career, which would be easy for you to do, I want to instead ask you to just think back over your whole career to some instances where you feel you faced a challenge, you faced something difficult, and that now you look back, you can see they were quite significant in shaping who you are. So maybe just go back to earlier in your career and give us an example of something of this kind.
Yeah, thank you. So when I look back at my 30-year career, there were many moments of crisis, setback, either personal failure or an externally driven issue or failure. And consistent with the research, when I reflect on my career, actually, they were incredibly valuable. They typically represented the basis or the foundation for an upward shift in my career. Probably the best story to start with is my first real career setback, or I felt it was a setback. It was my first real failure as a manager. And I started my career, I think, like many others. You go to school and you go to university and you get a degree and you join the graduate program and you're kind of conditioned to think that the way to progress is to not make mistakes, because that's what doing your A-levels and doing your degree kind of teaches you. And then you're given junior responsibilities and you progress through to management. And again, the idea is try not to mess up. And I guess I probably had quite a fortunate start to my career in that I hadn't really been involved in too many issues or problems. But in 2004, 2005, I was involved in a problem or a failure. I felt a management failure. And I won't kind of go into too much of the boring accounting, but the summary story was I'd moved from Hong Kong to London to lead a piece of the business for the bank here in the UK. And the accounting regime that governed that business changed over a year end. And we had to do a lot of work to make sure that the accounting was properly set up to reflect the performance of the business that I was leading. And that year end transition happened, and I thought everything was okay. But in February, March, our auditors at the time said it wasn't okay. And the long and short of it is we had to recognize quite a significant loss. There was no economic loss, but there was an accounting loss that we had to recognize at the time. It was unexpected, it was unplanned, it was very inconvenient. And in the context of the business that I was in at the time, it was big. You know, it was a large amount of money. And it was, you know, I was at a personal level, felt terrible about it. I had never been involved in anything like that. I'd kind of watched other people grapple with issues like this, but I hadn't had to do it myself. And I did what I thought should be done, and I offered my resignation. And my boss at the time, who's one of my key mentors through my career, rejected my resignation and just said, no, I want you to fix this problem. So I set about fixing the problem, and it was, you know, it probably took about 3 months of work. I just reflect on that period. The best way to describe how difficult it was at a personal level, you know, having felt that I'd let everybody down, I worked in the trading room, and for a number of weeks, I had to walk into that trading room and do my job and try and fix this problem. And it felt like I was that person in the room that everybody was talking about, but nobody wanted to make eye contact with. It was not easy. But I set about fixing the problem and fixing it in a way that I thought was right. I recognized, or I don't know if I recognized or made the decision, probably both, that everybody else involved in this problem, and there were a lot of them, I figured out they felt bad about it too. So I decided I wasn't going to make them feel any worse. I was going to just try and create an environment where we could together fix this problem. And I took the responsibility for it. Strictly speaking, I could have argued it was, you know, the accountants that got it wrong, but that wasn't the way to look at it for me. So I worked through the problem. And towards the end of the summer, I remember my boss took me into his office and he said 2 things. One, I just want to thank you for tidying that up. Don't do it again, but you did a really nice job of tidying it up. And the group finance director would like to see you. Oh dear. The group finance director at this point, I didn't know very well. I'd met him once, and that was to tell him that we'd created this problem. So I went upstairs to see him, and he said, I'd like you to consider doing this job for us in Asia. And at the time, it was a very big promotion. And I remember saying to him, so I'm sorry, I think you've got me confused with somebody else. And he explained, and he said, no, I know who you are. This job is a high profile job. It's in a different time zone. If I'm going to put somebody into it, I need to know they can deal under pressure, and I need to know that they can work well with people in difficult circumstances. I've just seen you do that. I liked the way that you handle the situation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when I look back at that period, it was a terrible experience. I felt dreadful about it. I offered my resignation, which thankfully was not accepted.
Can I just ask, Tony, at that moment where you went in to resign and he said, you know, no, we want you to fix it instead, what did you feel?
Oh, I think relief. I think that's what I was hoping they would say. But I still felt I had this. I developed quite a strong sense of duty to the organisation, which built actually steadily over time. And I really did feel I'd let the organisation, whatever that was, I'd let it down. And this was the honourable thing to do. So I think when I had that conversation with him, I was relieved. I thought, great, and I did want to fix it. And if I'd walked out the door and gone home that day, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to fix it. And part of fixing it was, it was cathartic for me, if that makes sense. And actually, I made some great friends in that period too. I mean, some of the people that we had to get into a room together with to sort through that are still very dear friends.
So looking back there, that was that experience where you were actually at the point of, well, you did resign, and then you were told go and fix it. And it sounds like you were quite quick to make that switch. And then it went, I don't know how painlessly it then was fixed, but you came through it. You were sort of rewarded with this promotion. When you look back, what did you learn about yourself or about how to lead people? What did you learn?
I learned a few things about myself. I think the benefit of going through a process like that is you do learn resilience, and it's not fun, but I think there's and I like to draw the analogy between what I went through at the time and then physical training. So if you want to run a marathon or do a long swim or build particular muscles, you have to stress them. This phrase positive adaptation, you have to put your physical system through stress, and through that stress it repairs and heals and becomes bigger and stronger. I think there's that's a nice analogy for what these kind of crises can do to you as a leader, because I can't claim that I enjoyed that 3-month period of fixing it. And it took me a long time actually to be able to feel good about it, or to even tell the story. But you come out the end of it and think, okay, well, I survived that. If I'm in a similar situation, I can do it again. And then you also develop a sense for how everybody else feels through it and how to lead through it. Because of course I wasn't the only person involved. There were probably 10, 12 other people who felt pretty much as I did. So you get insights into yourself which help you build resilience and confidence in your resilience. But I think if you're thoughtful, you get insights into other people.
Yeah. And so that 3 months wasn't fun, but you did it. How did you do it? How did you go from feeling, desperately embarrassed or, whatever you'd felt at the beginning to sticking with it and making it work?
Yeah, the organization became a little bit political around the issue. So there was a little bit of mudslinging and stuff going on at the time. And I remember taking a conscious decision to say, no, I will just behave like this is all my fault, invite people into the room and say, look, this has happened. I'm in charge. If you could help me work on fixing this, let's just work together through it. And there were a number of people involved, obviously finance, accounting, and our external auditors. And I think people responded well to the environment we created, and that was deliberate. I knew how I felt. It wasn't good, and I just presumed everybody else was in the same place. And I was beginning to learn at that point. I was beginning to understand how toxic fear can be in an environment. If you want people to be at their best, if you want people thinking clearly and crisply and making good decisions, don't create an environment in which they're afraid. That's just not good. And I think I was at that stage in my career when that was beginning to be apparent to me. So I could use that. And then it was a series of meetings and workshops to figure out what the problem was and how to do it, and then communicate back up into the organization.
But that's quite something. I mean, to say basically, I own this. It was my problem. I want you to come and help me with this. That's pretty unusual in organizations, isn't it?
I know that I was very fortunate to be in an organization at the time whose culture I think was genuinely healthy. And the response that I got from my line manager and then from the group finance director, I think speaks volumes of their character and the tone that they set and the culture that they set. I think it's really important for anybody who might listen to this, who's aspiring to be a leader, to transition from management roles into leadership roles. That's part of what leaders need to do. You need to take responsibility for things, and you need to be visibly seen to be the difference between the problem and the people that are facing into it. I also think I was fortunate to have been in an organization where if you asked for help, you got run over by people who wanted to help you. That moment of possible vulnerability where you say, I would like your help, always worked in that organization. And again, I think that speaks volumes about the organization I was in. So I guess there's two things for me. It's having the confidence and the courage to say, this is on me, I'm in charge, it's my fault. But in addition, I can't do this on my own. And I would really appreciate some help. Everybody leaned into it, and it ended up being a good experience.
Yeah, great. It's a very powerful example, John, and especially because it's, I think now, especially through the pandemic, there's a lot more awareness of the need to sort of step in and support each other in organizations. But I think back in 2004-05, it was a different time, and that's really saying a lot about you and the organization, that you were both able to own that and that people came forward to help and you could trust that. So yeah, great learning. Thank you. What about maybe moving forward a little bit and giving us another kind of instance which was also challenging, possibly in a different way?
Well, there were many. I think probably the next one to share is the global financial crisis. So this was a different kind of crisis in the sense that actually I hadn't made a mistake. There wasn't a management failure, but I was in a reasonably senior position at the time. I was the treasurer for HSBC, and I was deputy head of the markets business, and the global financial crisis hit. And at that stage in my career, I felt that I knew enough about the financial system and how it worked to know that the financial system was genuinely at risk. I could see enough to know that without the intervention that Hank Paulson led on behalf of the US government, without that kind of intervention, the financial system was going to fail. So that wasn't a crisis about internal weakness or failure. This was an external crisis where I had a leadership role, and I had to play my part. Now, the first learning from that was I was a group treasurer, but I was also the deputy head of markets. And when you're the deputy head of something, you can normally look at the person who's in the head position, your boss, and think, well, I could do that job. Most of the time. And I think in most cases, the deputy can do the head's job. But during the financial crisis, it became very clear to me why the head of global markets had the role and why I was his deputy. It was on that, 19 days out of 20, you can do his job, but on the 20th day, if you're observant and you're honest, you realize why you couldn't do his job. So I learned that about myself. I learned the gap between myself and the person who had the role. And I had the privilege of watching him lead in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, not just him, but his boss as well. The tone that they set, their capacity for making rapid, significant decisions with incomplete information, at a time of acute stress. And in the main, for them, what I observed, they projected this outward sense of calm. They projected an image that conveyed to the rest of us that they were in control. And I've chatted with them since, and this is all ancient history now. And I have chatted with them since, and they don't remember feeling in control. But that's not the point. As leaders, they were conveying to us that they had time. That was the key thing. They had time, and it didn't. We were under stress. We were under attack. The system was failing. There were, Lehman was happening, and there were government interventions, and banks were being restructured. But I had that privilege, and I learned about the gaps that I still had, because, as I say, on the proverbial 20th day, I couldn't do the job. I knew what I had to work on, but I learned about the importance of visibility for leaders. The moment you step into a leadership role, everybody's watching. And I learned the need to we used to use the phrase, my boss at the time used to use the phrase method acting a lot, and it was always tongue in cheek, but looking back, I know exactly what he meant. What's going on in here, that can be a private matter. What the world sees is something else. And in times of crisis, when people are looking for an anchor, they're normally looking for something to hold on to, some degree of certainty. At the time, for the people that we were leading, to see a leadership team that appeared to be in control. And it was others that take credit for that, not me, because I was observing that I had some work to do to get to their level.
But so John, you saw that this would have been the 20th day, which you couldn't have put on that kind of performance. How were you able to get from that awareness of the importance of being able to appear calm and in control to then actually being able to look that way next time when you were in the hot seat?
Well, yeah, practice. I think practice, and the reason that I think a conversation like this can be powerful for people aspiring to be leaders is to create an expectation in people's minds that if you do want to aspire to significant positions of leadership, you need to go through these experiences as often as possible. And that doesn't mean people need to go out and kind of light fires and create crises. But every time you're tested in this way, you build the muscles, you build the capabilities. And I don't think there's a shortcut to that. You can read about it, and that's great. That will help, give you something to refer back to in the moment of crisis. But I think you just have to practice it. And what I started to do, when I reflect on my career, every time I had a choice about what I might do next, the choices that I were making unconsciously were, well, always do the difficult thing. And then round about this time, I started to translate that into a very conscious decision and to quite overt career guidance to people when they'd ask me, how should I think about my next role or my next career move? How should I build a career plan? What I started to tell people, and still tell people, is if you have a choice, try and just go for the thing that scares you the most, the one where you think you will learn the most, the one where you've got the least certainty that you're going to be successful. And that only works, I think, if you're ambitious, because it doesn't give you an easy route, but it does give you the opportunities to test yourself, to find out what's lacking, and then to build the muscles that you need to be complete as a leader. So for me, I think at that point, I just started to increase my confidence in my ability to be a bit braver. And I was lucky that the organization kept giving me more things to do as well.
So that's so interesting, John, because you're really saying just always, if you want to get there, always pick the hard path. And I'm struck by, how bold that sounds, but also thinking about some of the research I've been doing on mental health in leaders and about how there can be a lot of struggle going on underneath as they try to do the kind of performance you're talking about. So how did you for yourself, or how do you recommend people resource themselves if they're going to keep taking the hard path and do stuff that scares them the most? How are they going to sleep at night? How are they going to be able to cope?
Yeah, that's a big question for leaders, and I think it's a really important one because, the cliche that you can't pour from an empty cup, I think holds true. We've already said that, if you're in a leadership position, you're visible. Everybody's watching you, and it's a performance. It might not be method acting, but it is a performance, and you need to be well enough in yourself to put on a good performance. So you do have to look after yourself, and I think that's really important. And I think leaders should acknowledge that openly. That the heroic, I never get to sleep. I work 24 hours a day. I don't do any exercise. The business always comes first stuff. I think is not wise, and I think it's not sustainable. It's not wise advice, and it's not a sustainable practice. So I think you do have to look after yourself. I developed my own techniques for that, and I think I will always be happy to share them. Share them not in the spirit of this is what I do, so I want you to do the same thing, because everyone, they've got their own way of recharging or decompressing. But the point of a leader explaining that they take care of themselves consciously, and they try and make sure that they as a leader are at their best for their people, That's important because it gives the people they're leading to do the same thing. Again, there can be a misunderstanding that in order to get to the top, that you have to sacrifice everything, including your health, including your well-being. That's not true. I was fortunate. I joined an organization as a graduate trainee. I left as the chief executive, and I think I managed to stay well and healthy and fit all the way through it, and have the privilege of raising kids. And so I think it's important that leaders do look after themselves, but then they explain that that's part of their responsibility to their people too, because you can't pour from an empty cup.
So can you share some of the things that you did to maintain your own mental and physical well-being?
Yeah, lots of different stories. Exercise has always been part of my routine, and I know still the case that if I'm stuck with something, a work problem, a human problem at work, whatever it is, most of those problems for me get resolved when I'm exercising, if I'm running or swimming, or because that's when I can, my mind deconnects, if you like, with the problem, and then the subconscious can work, and the endorphins kick in, I guess, and there's a point at which I can get some clarity. Now, that works for me. I've got colleagues who would prefer to smoke a cigar and have a glass of wine, or go for a walk, or whatever it is. But exercise has played a very meaningful role in my life. The other is family. I have 2 children, grown-up children now. But for most of the time, and even during the financial crisis, the period that I was sharing the story on earlier, when the world was melting, most nights I would get home for their bedtime. Not every night, but most nights I would. And that was a conscious decision that I would do that. And sometimes I'd have to do a bit of work after they'd gone to bed at home. But it was a conscious decision to leave the trading floor at 7 o'clock, try and be home so that I could put the kids to bed. And no one in the organization objected. But it was a conscious decision. So for me, I guess exercise and then balance with family, that was my formula. I would just encourage everybody else to have the same, have their own formula. I do remember there was a period, probably 15 or 17 years into my career, where I was a bit frustrated with this whole notion of work-life balance, and I was waiting for the bank to fix it for me. And I had that nice moment of clarity one day when I just recognized that no one else has got time to fix this for me. I mean, it's on me. But I think it's crucial that leaders do take care of themselves. Leadership tests you in every way, and you need to be at your best.
Great, thank you, John. Do we have time for one more crucible of learning?
Gosh, I mean, there are many. I think that another one, Asian financial crisis. So my first crisis. So the chronology is not quite consistent here, but going back, I was 10 years into my career. I had a really interesting job, and I was working in Indonesia during the Asian crisis. And the Asian financial crisis rolled through countries. It started in Thailand and Korea, and it rolled through different Asian markets. And it came to Indonesia towards the end of the crisis. And I was in charge of the bank's treasury function at the time. And I was very fortunate. We had a wonderful CEO in country who was fabulous, who created a great environment that did make us feel psychologically safe. And I figured out that Indonesia was going to be a problem. And working with my colleagues in Hong Kong, we managed to position the bank mostly well for it. But there was a moment in that when I felt that I had to, not whistleblow, but I had to escalate my concerns. I was getting anxious about something that I could see in the future that nobody else was seeing. And it was, in simple terms, if the Indonesian rupiah were to devalue in the way that the other Asian currencies were, this was going to create a banking crisis. It was going to create a crisis for us, even though we were, part of a foreign bank. And that was going to have implications that we weren't thinking through. And I'd explained it to the local CEO, who was wonderful. But I still felt this was a bigger issue for the group, and I needed to escalate it. And I do remember sitting in my apartment, sitting on cold marble floor in the apartment, making a call to London. And this is back in the time actually when international phone calls were not that common, but making a call to London, going around actually a few levels of management to find somebody who'd listen to me to say, we've got a bigger problem coming here if this happens. And I need someone to talk to me about what we might do. I need a thought partner on this, because at the time I felt I didn't have one. Again, the organisation was fabulous, and I found that person to talk to, and we managed to plot a way through. But it was another moment of using the skills that I developed, looking into the future, recognizing something was coming that I don't think we were prepared for. And the decision, I think the reason I remember sitting on the floor was that I felt a bit guilty about going around people to raise and escalate an issue. But I still thought it was, I had to do it. I felt it was a responsibility. And again, the organisation responded really well to it.
Great. Thank you, John. So has there ever been a situation which you just couldn't, for whatever reason, take something positive from, see it as something that you have something valuable to learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think inevitably there will be through a career. There's always the potential for an external event to derail you. There are some things that you can control, and inevitably in life there are things that you won't be able to control. And you can look at that event and think, well, there is nothing good about that. And I think over a long career, it's inevitable at some point you will reach that kind of moment. But I think the way that people should think about it, if they find themselves in that position, is that you have a choice at that point in terms of how you respond. So you don't have a choice about the event, but you can choose to respond in a way that's consistent with yourself and your values. And that's really easy to say, that in the cold light of day, looking back at a long career, it's very easy to say, well, when it's really difficult, or when you've been, something has happened that you think's unfair, that you can find good in it. Maybe you can't find good in it, but you do have control over how you respond. And it's important, I think, for people to think that through, because we've got two brains, right? We've got the monkey brain and we've got the kind of the thoughtful version. In that kind of moment of stress and difficulty, try and make sure that you're making very conscious and thoughtful decisions about how you respond. You might not be able to control the event, but you can control your response and your reaction and what the world sees. And I think that's important. You can't control some of the inputs. You can control the outputs. Mm-hmm. And if you have a leadership role or a leadership brand, it's important to get it right. Because even in those moments of adversity, if the world sees you respond in a gracious, noble, elegant way, they notice.
Yeah. So here you are, you've had, almost 30 years in one organization. Now you're not only moving into helping establish a totally different kind of organization. What is exciting about that for you? What feels challenging about that for you?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity that I've got. I feel very privileged, and it's a learning opportunity. So I've had a career in a large established organization with this amazing 150-some year history. Now I've got the opportunity to do a startup, to build a government-sponsored banking startup with a very clear purpose and mission. So I'm learning a whole load of things now, and it's again, I think anyone thinking about plotting a long career, try and make sure that you're still giving yourself the opportunity to keep learning and keep developing, because the moment you stop, I think it's time to change roles. So I get to learn now about a startup. I get to learn how the public sector works. The government is more involved in the economy now than it's been in my lifetime, I think. And I get to learn about the technologies required to engineer this quite daunting transition from an industrial economy to a net zero economy. So I in a very selfish way, I'm hugely excited about all the learning that I've got in front of me, and I've got a slightly different leadership challenge too, because I've gone from being steward of something very well established, I think a wonderful culture and a very clear sense of its purpose, to an organization with a very clearly defined mission and purpose, but an emerging culture. We're 100 people now, so we're building the culture little bit by bit every day, but it's still emerging. And I've got the privilege now of putting together a team of people who can work with me to make that real.
Yeah, so it sounds like sort of what is exciting is also challenging, but it feels a very positive future for you.
I think so, and there's a mindset thing here, Sally. I think that's really important. I've come out of private sector into public sector. It's a different working environment. I decided when I was going to do this job that I was going to enjoy the difference. I was going to enjoy learning how a different part of the world works, and I wasn't going to allow myself to be stressed for a moment about the fact it's different. And that's a mindset. It's a choice. And I wouldn't, and anyone who's thinking about making a similar shift, I would say you must take the same approach, because otherwise, if you try and, if an individual comes and tries to change the public sector, good luck. It's not going to happen. And there's not necessarily a need to do it, but I'm really enjoying learning how something else works. There is a logic and a basis and a history and a precedent often to everything that I see that's different. And it's great just to see how it works.
Fantastic. John, we could go on for the rest of the day, but I know there's a whole stack of questions from other people waiting for you. So I'm going to hand over back to Chris now, and he will field the next part. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, John, for this fascinating conversation. So many leadership lessons to be learned here very clearly in keeping with our topic. So I would like to specifically thank our audience members for all their comments that I've seen in the chat, and also from John's former colleagues at HSBC who are very much confirming what John has said out of HSBC's culture. And also especially to those who have submitted a range of highly pertinent questions for John. Unfortunately, time will only permit us to go through a selection of those questions. So without further ado, here is the first question for John. Matthew Steiner asks John, what are the 3 most important issues in leadership today?
What a great question to start with. Matthew, thank you. So start with human-centric leadership. I think the days of the traditional strongman school of leadership are numbered. I think you have to lead authentically now. I think you have to lead with some vulnerability to lead people authentically, and that's important, particularly as the younger generation joins the workforce. Their expectations of leaders, I think, are changing. So having human-centric leaders who recognize that actually the most profound responsibility as leaders is to create the best possible environment for their people. That's key. Not enough leaders are stepping up and articulating their role in that way. I think, candidly, it represents a lack of courage, and I would encourage them to find the courage to do it. I think their workforce will benefit from it. Some vulnerability comes with it, but I think as a leader, you only lead people. You don't lead anything else. So I think that's the first thing. Human-centric leadership and positive leadership, where you give people a reason to follow you, where they can choose to follow you rather than be afraid not to. I think the second issue relates actually to my new role, which is the carbon transition. Every part of the developed economy is going to have to change in some way. And we are beginning to have an honest conversation with the scale of change required and the costs of the change. But that conversation has just started. There is I think, a slightly overly optimistic view that says, well, we can do all this and the economy can continue to grow and everyone can make a lot of money and it's going to be fine. I think we can do it, and I think it will be fine, but it's not going to be free. And governments are going to have to play a large role, I think, on behalf of all of us to socialize some of these costs and to make sure that the transition happens. And then the third piece, and this is broader, but it's I think I'm old enough now and grey enough, I think, to make this comment. I think all leaders need to hold open the debate on the need for truth. In the political spheres in Western liberal democracies, confidence is being eroded because too many leaders seem to have a problem with truth. And we can't let this drift. you can't govern a world without an agreed understanding of what is real and what isn't. So 3 things for leaders: human-centric leadership, make sure you give people a reason to follow you and don't just rule by fear. This carbon transition is going to cost us a lot of money, and we've got to talk about it.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Now, just neatly following your explanation about the first point you mentioned about creating the right environment, we have a question from Professor Mari Sacco, here Oxford Saïd faculty member and a colleague of Sally and mine, which will no doubt resonate very much with what a lot of us, basically all of us, experience these days. How do you build a rapport with new colleagues in a virtual environment?
With great difficulty. And I think, again, I'm going to be reasonably blunt in my views here, because I think it's important. I think it's difficult stroke impossible to create effective human connections solely via the internet. I mean, it's been a tool, an indispensable tool over the last 2 years, and it's amazing that we can do things like this. But if you want to build a healthy culture that requires human beings to be human and to be at their best, you have to create an environment where they can connect in a face-to-face environment. And I don't think we should pretend otherwise. I think this is a great stopgap and it's a great substitute, but I think it's really difficult. Now, obviously, the more we practice this, the more we will get better. But there's some biological imperatives, some biological realities that we can't ignore as human beings. We're social animals, we need to connect. This is okay, this is adequate, but it's not really good enough for building rapport, and then I'm extending rapport into a proper healthy culture. And I probably also just should signal that I am learning how to do this now. So I started to lead again in September. I was really fortunate that we had a few weeks in the office together before the latest set of lockdowns. But we're back in a lockdown environment, and all of my meetings are virtual. I'm trying to build a startup virtually via Teams, and it's a challenge. But I think that the key point is, let's not pretend that we can do this indefinitely. We need to get back. We need to find a way to get back to a proper human connection.
Thank you, John. And I couldn't agree more. That's what our students keep on asking us, really. How do you manage a workforce? How do you lead in a virtual environment? And really, the jury is still out. We are all still learning to do this as we go along. Now, the next question is a different question, a bit of a left field question, short and to the point. It is from Caleb Khan, a 12-year student in Oxford, and he asks you very simply, are you bullish on crypto?
Caleb, thanks for the question. I love the question. So, am I bullish on crypto? No, I'm not. I think if you want to get involved in crypto, you should decide whether you want to be investing or gambling. And I would encourage you to think that if you're involved in crypto, that you're largely gambling rather than investing. So that's my first point. The second point I would make is, whoever is investing in crypto in a personal capacity, make sure that you're not investing more than you can afford to lose. Because it's a very new part of the system. There's lots of reasons, I think, to be a little bit nervous about the way in which that part of the market is evolving. So I wouldn't ever want to claim that I know which way crypto is going, up or down. It's gambling, it's entertainment. I still don't think it's really found its place in mainstream finance as an investable asset. It might, but in order for it to do so, in my view, it will require effective regulation, and I don't think we have effective regulation yet.
Certainly very good and sound advice from John here. The next question is from Luca Bazzani, a current Oxford MBA student, and he was asking John a question that many, if not all of today's leaders will be wondering about, and that John already has alluded to earlier. The question is, what will be the key leadership challenges, both external and internal, to orchestrate a common effort towards net zero?
A great question, and a question that I think every country needs to, or is debating a lot, I think. those of you who are UK based, I think you can look at the way the UK government is aligning around this challenge. They've set some very clear policy markers. We've got a net zero strategy, and we've got policy markers around the key industries that are required. They've set up the infrastructure bank to help mobilize the finance around it. So you can see that governments, effective governments, are beginning to lay plans, send market signals, and to lay the foundations for the transition. So that's one part of it. The second part we've already alluded to, which is we need to have a grown-up conversation with the voting public in Western liberal democracies, and in countries that are not democracies. They still need to have the conversation with the people they're leading about the trade-offs that we're going to need to make. Now, the current kind of consensus approach to net zero is we're not willing to make lifestyle trade-offs. We're not willing to use less electricity. We're not willing to have less mobility or to be less warm. We want everything we've got now, and we're just trying to figure out how to do it at a lower carbon intensity, and that's fine. But that has consequences, because we're still going to see a significant warming of the planet based on all of the data available to us now. So we need to have a proper conversation with people about the trade-offs and how the costs are going to be incurred. As I said before, this notion that we can get through this and everyone's balance sheet's going to look fine, as a banker, makes no sense to me. We have an industrial economy that is fit for purpose, but only for a finite period of time. We need to build another one, and that's going to take resources and costs. So I think if you want to look at a blueprint for how best to do this, the way that the UK government has lined up around this, and actually its track record of achieving its carbon budgets in the last 12, 15 years, I think is really encouraging. That's a good way to do it. But we still need to keep having this conversation with people about trade-offs. And if we're not prepared to change the way that we live, we're probably going to have to reallocate some of our collective wealth towards building the infrastructure that's going to allow us to live this way, but without consuming the carbon that we currently are.
Thank you, John. Next question is from Julian Gong, an Oxford Diploma in Financial Strategy alum. And it's more of a personal question, but which chimes, I think, very nicely with the conversation you had earlier about the crucibles of leadership learning with Sally. The question is, how are you managing the career transition at this point of life? What's your advice for people looking at career transition at executive level?
Yeah, I think I would encourage anyone who's thinking about a transition to have the honest conversation with themselves about what would excite them most in the next chapter of their life. Now, it might be that you've also got some basic requirements you need to meet. You might need to have a salary in order to meet your family commitments, etc. So that's fine. But to the extent that you have a choice, I'd encourage you to think about what excites you the most, what gives you the most energy. And for many, without knowing the question at all, for many, the need to keep learning, I think, is crucial. So transition normally denotes a change. If you're going to change, what do you want to learn next? I was having a conversation actually with somebody a while ago about how do you give career advice to somebody in their teens? And the best I could come up with was just ask them two questions. Who do they want to help? And how do they want to help them? And we had an argument about it for a while, but we eventually settled on the conclusion that's not a bad set of questions. Who do you want to help? Is it people in your village? Is it people in your town? Do you want to help the planet? Is it people who like tennis? Is it your particular community? And then how do you want to help them? What do you want to do? Do you want to make them better? Do you want to go into medicine? Do you want to build cars for them and help them achieve their mobility gains? What do you want to do? Who do you want to help? And how do you want to help them? And that might be useful as well in terms of framing your transition. Transitions for me have nearly always been about learning something new, and I hope that I'll have the energy for a few more as well after this one.
Wonderful. We have a question which actually comes here internally from the team at SBS, and again, which very nicely, harks back to all the time and the learning you have had throughout your career over HSBC to UKIP. The question is, do you discern a difference in leadership requirements between a shareholder-owned organization such as HSBC and a government-owned organization such as the Infrastructure Bank?
The short answer is no. I would say no. There's no difference in leadership requirements. It's a different type of role and you experience it differently, but what's required of a leader, whether it's public sector or private sector, you've got to be good at stakeholder management. And HSBC have many millions of shareholders. The bank that I'm building now has one shareholder, so that's very different. But you have to pay attention to the task of stakeholder management in the same way. But I think the leadership requirements, again, my philosophy is that leadership is all about people. You don't lead anything else. Whether it's people in the public sector or people in the private sector, your role as leader is to create the right environment for those people to be at their best in service of that mission, whether it's building a bank for net zero or whether it's leading an established organization. And I think, there are only really two ways to lead people. And I've alluded to this earlier in my remarks. There are only two ways to lead people in substance. One, what I would call positive leadership, where you inspire people with the mission. You have a vision for where you want to go, and you explain to them where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And you create an environment where they would choose to follow you. And they could choose to follow you because they like your intellect or your EQ or the way you lead people or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Everyone has different attributes. But that's positive leadership. And it's about curating a genuine followership. Sadly, there's negative leadership too, where you can recognize that as a leader, you have significant influence over the lives of other people, and you can create an environment that says, you follow me or else. You follow me or I will make your life difficult. I will adversely impact your career. I will sack you. I will change your outlook. And in the short term, that works. I mean, it's a very inconvenient truth. In the short term, you can get quite a lot done through negative leadership and through the use of fear. In the long run, I think there's plenty of evidence building that it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. Personally, I think it's immoral. I think it's a terrible choice for a leader to make. But to come back to the question, no, I think leadership is leadership. It's all about people. Good leaders are contextual. They can find a way to lead in any environment. And the best leaders always choose positive leadership and curate genuine followerships.
Positive leadership, what a nice term. The next question, John, is from Clayton Redford, one of our current Oxford MBA students. And again, a very pertinent one for leaders, specifically in this finance sector. The question is, in a world characterized by change and uncertainty, what do you not see changing in finance over the next 10 years?
Yeah, Clayton, thank you. I think this is a really powerful question. I like the way that you phrase this because there's so much spoken about everything that's going to change in finance and the disruption, etc., which is great. I mean, there is an awful lot of change in the world of finance at the moment. But I do think it's really important for anybody in finance to answer the question you've asked in the way you've asked it, because there are some things that shouldn't change, and they can be really powerful anchors in making sure that we don't lose our way and we don't build or lose resilience in a system that now is resilient. The principles of sound finance haven't changed for hundreds of years. If you want, you think about all of the innovation that's happened in finance, all of the complex structuring that can go on, all of the derivative instruments that we've developed over time. They're great. They can be great tools, but at the end of the day, you come back to the sound principles of finance. If you lend somebody some money, you need to be lending against either security that you're confident in, or in cash, or against cash flows that you're confident will be made. And if there's a lack of either, it might not be a good loan or it might not be a good investment. New technology, crypto, NFTs, DLTs, great tools, but they're not going to change the principles of sound finance. So I think that's a really powerful question for anybody in the world of finance to contemplate. Get those anchors in your mind and then innovate around it. By all means, if the innovation can serve a more efficient version of that. But I don't believe that everything that we've learned about finance over the last, whether it's 500 years or 2,000 years, you pick your time horizon. It's a long time. I don't think we're about to unlearn all of that and invent some new laws. The laws, the principal laws of finance, will be revised round about the same time that the principal laws of physics will be revised, not before.
Excellent, John. Thank you. And Clayton actually has another question to ask you as well, again, more specific to world of finance. And the question is, coming from a systemically important bank, how should regulators evolve to handle decentralized finance to both facilitate growth and innovation, but at the same time protecting the monetary policy levers of government and the well-being of investors?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's an important question. There's lots being spoken about this at the moment. My personal view is that decentralized finance needs some guardrails put on it. I think it's got the potential to be very damaging if it's not controlled. Decentralized finance inevitably comes back to digital assets or crypto. I think at the next sensible big intervention in decentralized finance is not actually about decentralizing it. It's central bank digital currencies. I think they could be a very positive innovation for the financial system. But the key there is we're not creating new currencies that are not backed by governments. We're creating more efficient digital versions of currencies that are backed by governments. And I have a perspective that says I still want, at the end of the day, to have recourse back to a government appointed by the people that controls the instruments and the power of the state. I don't want to see a system disaggregated and decentralized into private actors. And remember, the financial system today is regulated because there is a need for governments to inject the public interest into companies that are run for the benefit of private capital. And it kind of works. I mean, we have setbacks and crises and stuff, but then we repair it and we move on. I can't conceive of a world where we can safely allow private sector capital to have the ultimate control over monetary instruments. So I think it requires very careful handling. I think regulators need to be strong in this area. I think most private sector participants have got a sensible view around this. I don't think they're being bold enough in defining boundaries. But I think decentralized finance has got its limits. Central bank digital currencies, I think, are a good idea. Privately managed currencies, I think, are a bad idea. And I think they should be regulated very, very tightly.
Wonderful, John. Thank you very much, John, for these very thoughtful answers, which I enjoyed very much. I'm sure will have resonated a lot with our audience members who are listening today. A virtual round of applause, please, for both John and Sally for providing us with a fascinating insight into the crucibles of leadership learning. And thank you to our audience members for contributing such thought-provoking questions. We are now at the end of our talk, unfortunately, but hopefully this will not be the last time we see each other. We're looking forward to welcoming you back here for our next edition of Business the Next 25 Years. And also feel free to watch out for articles and podcasts, which will explore many of the challenges business will face over the next quarter century. In the meantime, a big thank you from Oxford for being such a great audience. A wonderful rest of the day for you, and a good start of the weekend from me and the team here at Oxford Saïd.
Thank you.